Welcome to Mars, Marine.
There's a common expression among game players that graphics aren't everything. Doom 3 from id Software is going to make a compelling case both for those people as well as for people who think that graphics are, in fact, very, very important to gaming experiences. Doom 3 is quite possibly the best looking game ever made. Not just by a little bit, but by quite a long shot. It looks absolutely phenomenal. You can see it for yourself, and just hearing people speak about it doesn't really do the game justice, because seeing the use of lighting in the game, seeing the way that the monsters kind of lurch out at you, things of that nature, that needs to be experienced firsthand to be truly appreciated. Beneath all the flashy graphics, though, you'll find that Doom 3 is actually a very conventional first-person shooter. It's basically a corridor crawl where you shoot at anything that moves and proceed onward that way, unlocking locked doors and finding power-ups to keep your health and ammo and armor up, and basically blowing away lots and lots of bad guys who will often spawn right behind you and try to scare you that way, but since they spawn behind you all the time, it starts to become kind of predictable, actually. Doom 3 is definitely a much, much more advanced game from a technical standpoint than it is from a gameplay standpoint. And in fact, the gameplay is sort of derivative of many other older shooters, including the old Doom games that date back to more than 10 years ago. Doom 3 certainly gives an amazing first impression. You play as a nameless space marine who lands on Mars to help deal with some problems that have been occurring at the United Aerospace Corporation. It seems that, well, they've kind of unleashed the forces of hell or something like that. Soon enough, all hell breaks loose, but beforehand you get to explore the space a little bit, see people going about their business, eavesdrop on their conversations, and all this stuff is great. It really pulls you into the experience of the game, and then soon enough the action begins in earnest, and you're blasting away zombies and imps using pistols and shotguns and things of that nature. Since for whatever reason your character has no personality or identity, instead the designers tried to include story elements and really draw you into the experience by making you care about other characters in the world. So you'll frequently run across emails and voice recordings from these other characters who presumably have been killed by the forces of hell. Problem is, these things really take you out of the action of the game. You really don't want to be reading emails or listening to audio logs in kind of a dry, rambling style when you're really just want to be running around and blasting zombies and demons and things of that nature. There are other aspects of Doom 3 that just don't work from a continuity standpoint. And most games, you're not really going to criticize them much about their story because the gameplay is what matters. It's not the story that's important. But again, since Doom 3 is trying to draw you into this immersive world, suddenly these little sticking points stick out quite a bit. So anyway, you're this Marine and you're sent in to do a dangerous job, but you don't have things like night vision. For some reason, even though it's the 22nd century, none of your guns have light amplification modules. All you have is this flashlight, and you can't even carry the flashlight and the gun at the same time, so you're frequently having to switch between them. Furthermore, there's just no explanation for why your Marine, of all the Marines on this base, is able to survive all the madness going on. First of all, why aren't you turned into a zombie? And second of all, why is it that you're actually having a pretty easy time of killing most of this stuff when you're hearing all this radio chatter of all your Marine buddies getting slaughtered? You go through the game entirely on your own. Actually, though, on occasion you get to see these little sentry droids walking around and absolutely making mincemeat out of the enemies. So they're these little tiny spider robots that are easily stronger than the enemies you're facing. So why is this base having trouble with the forces of hell? It doesn't really make sense. But, no matter. Let's just run around and kill some demons and stuff like that and worry about that stuff. Doom 3, even though it's a linear game and has basically just a predictable level design, does deliver some pretty impressive thrills just when you're facing off against monsters. They'll often lunge at you, get right in your face, throw things at you, the imp fireballs, and some of the former human Marines you'll be fighting against exhibit some basic artificial intelligence. They'll hide behind things and stuff like that, make for a decent fight. But fighting the game's enemies really is interesting. It's pretty thrilling, even though they're not that smart. They pretty much just rush straight at you. And furthermore, the weapons that you have at your disposal aren't very interesting either. My biggest problem with them is that they all sound pretty underpowered, but beyond that, they're just very direct point-and-shoot weapons for the most part, and the ones that aren't are basically useless melee weapons, even though the chainsaw is a whole lot of fun, or they're explosive weapons that really aren't practical because almost all the fighting in Doom 3 occurs at close range, so you're liable to do much more damage to yourself than to your enemies by using explosives. The one other little thing about the enemies that bugs me as a Doom fan is that when you kill them, they instantly kind of disintegrate into ash. It's sort of this Blade or Buffy the Vampire Slayer effect. Considering the first episode of the original Doom game is called Knee Deep in the Dead, and you'd find your way around in those games by following the trail of corpses that you left behind you, it's sort of disappointing that the aftermath of a fight in Doom 3 is just sort of this sterilized environment with nothing to show for all the carnage that took place just moments before. Again, though, it can't be overstated that the graphics and just the animation in the game, the atmosphere that the graphics create, really does do a lot to make the gameplay more enjoyable and more intense. As you're exploring the game's environments, you really will be on edge a lot of the time just because it's often so dark, and you're just waiting for the next thing to lurch out at you, and gradually more and more enemies are introduced, and eventually you will, in fact, get past the relatively often bland-looking confines of the UAC headquarters and get to hell and beyond. So things do get very, very interesting eventually, though at times during the middle portions of the game, your main motivating factor to keep pressing on will be to experience that next change of pace. Doom 3's single-player campaign is actually of above-average length. It'll take you probably between 15 to 20 hours to get through. It's actually not very challenging at the default difficulty setting. The darkness is sort of the toughest foe in the game, because you'll learn to observe the enemy patterns and you'll be able to dodge their attacks fairly easily while returning fire with your own weapons. So if you're a veteran shooter fan, you should probably play the game at the highest available difficulty when you first start out. Beyond the single-player mode, you've got a multiplayer mode available, but unfortunately it's sort of an afterthought in Doom 3. It only supports 4 players out of the box. It seems that players have already figured out a way to surpass the 4-player limit, but at any rate, the actual gameplay itself is just okay. I mean, it really is just standard deathmatching, and you might experience some more severe lag than you would in a game that's better optimized for multiplayer competition. Unless the mod makers do a big number with Doom 3's multiplayer, it really probably isn't going to last anyone for a terribly long time. But did I mention that Doom 3 looks really, really good? Actually, one of the very cool things about it from a technical standpoint is that even if your machine is at around the minimum system requirements, it's probably still going to be a very, very impressive looking game for you. In the end, Doom 3 really is the technical tour de force that's been promised all along. As a game, though, it's probably not going to be the most remarkable first-person shooter that you've ever played. Does that mean it's bad? Certainly not. Doom 3 is a great game overall, and it really does go to show that having incredibly atmospheric, incredibly good graphics can really help a game along the way to going from being, basically just typical and run-of-the-mill to being decidedly above average and truly great.